Okay, ready to unpack this.
Let's go for it.
We're going deep today into process chemistry,
Deep dive time.
and specifically the challenges of scaling up, production of cannabinoid and psychedelic APIs.
Right. So we're talking about, taking those molecules that show so much promise
Yeah,
from small scale, like lab experiments, all the way up to large scale manufacturing.
like moving from something super niche to something
Huge.
huge. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so for this deep dive, we're using Watson's Pharmaceutical Process Development.
Great book.
I know, right?
Kind of like our guide, our roadmap for today.
So it's like, I'm trying to think of a good analogy.
Yeah.
Like taking that, super hoppy IPA that
Yeah.
you get at the microbrewery
Okay.
and figuring out how to make Budweiser,
I like that analogy. Yeah.
but with even higher stakes, considering we're dealing with actual medicine here.
Oh, for sure. Way higher stakes.
So the book, Watson points out that a big challenge is
Uh-huh.
balancing three things.
Right. It's all about balance. Yeah.
Maximizing yield, minimizing cost, and dealing with the waste,
Absolutely.
while making sure that what you get in the end is safe and it works.
The final product's got to be good, right?
Yeah,
Both safe and effective.
it sounds pretty tough.
Yeah, it's a balancing act for sure.
So where do we even start with this?
Well, I think the first thing is just recognizing how complex it is
Yeah.
to scale up any chemical process, but especially when we're dealing with something as sensitive as, cannabinoids or psychedelics.
Like, could you break that down a bit more?
Sure, think of it like trying to bake the perfect chocolate chip cookie.
Okay, love it.
You've got your recipe, you've nailed it, it's one perfect cookie.
Okay.
Now imagine having to bake thousands of those cookies.
Oh, wow.
Every single one has to be identical, not only for taste, but for, quality and potency.
That's a huge jump.
Huge leap.
What else should we be thinking about when we go from bench scale to pilot scale and then finally, making tons of it?
Commercial, yeah.
Commercial.
Right. Well, Watson really emphasizes the importance of documentation
Okay.
and really understanding your process, like at the bench scale.
Got it.
If you don't know every single thing affecting your reaction, scaling up is just a huge gamble.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like building a skyscraper without blueprints.
Yeah, for sure.
You need that solid foundation.
So what goes into those blueprints, I guess?
Well, a crucial part is understanding all the different parameters,
Huh.
like temperature, pressure, how long the reaction goes.
Okay.
All of those can affect not only how much you make, but also how pure it is.
So even like a small change in temperature could screw things up.
Oh, absolutely. It can have a ripple effect.
Wow.
Like if you increase the temperature to speed things up,
Yeah, to get it done faster.
right, you might end up with way more impurities.
Oh, I see.
It's all about balance, and you need to really understand something called reaction kinetics.
Kinetics, what's that?
It's basically the study of how fast reactions happen and what affects those rates. And that's crucial when scaling up, because a reaction that's totally predictable at a small scale
Right.
can become a whole different beast at a larger scale.
Okay, like a small group versus a giant crowd.
Exactly.
Right.
And on top of that, there's mixing and heat transfer,
Right.
which get way more complicated in bigger reactors.
Yeah.
You got to make sure the mixing and temperature are consistent.
For good yield and quality.
Exactly.
Clearly, scaling up isn't just multiplying a recipe, so what else does Watson talk about?
He really stresses the need to evaluate your production methods early on
Okay.
and think about the pros and cons of batch versus continuous processes,
Right.
especially in relation to how much you want to make and the quality you're aiming for.
Okay, remind me about the difference between batch and continuous again.
Okay, so batch processing is like baking individual cakes.
Okay, I like it.
You mix the ingredients, bake the cake, clean the oven, and repeat.
Makes sense.
Continuous processing is more like, I don't know, a conveyor belt.
Yeah.
Ingredients go on one side and the product comes out the other.
So continuous is more efficient,
It can be, yeah.
but probably more expensive to set up.
It can require a bigger upfront investment, yeah.
So batch is better for smaller batches, early trials.
Yeah.
And continuous is when you're ready to go big.
Right, when you want large-scale and consistent production.
Got it.
Continuous has its advantages, like better control over everything, less downtime, often higher yields.
All right.
But as Watson points out, switching to continuous can be a big commitment. Investment in equipment, expertise, the whole validation process.
So there's no perfect answer. It depends on what you're making and how much you need.
Exactly. No one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
It's all about evaluating your specific needs.
And that's where it gets interesting, right?
Definitely.
Especially when we think about cannabinoid and psychedelic APIs.
Yeah, they come with their own unique challenges.
So what are some of those challenges? And how does it affect this whole batch versus continuous decision?
Well, for starters, a lot of these compounds are sensitive.
Okay.
Sensitive to light, heat, or even just air.
So you got to be extra careful with them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that might make batch processing more appealing in some cases because you have more control over the environment.
Okay, so even if continuous seems more efficient on paper,
Right.
you might have to adjust based on these sensitivities.
You got it.
What else makes these compounds tricky?
Well, think about where they come from.
Uh,
A lot of these cannabinoid and psychedelic APIs are extracted from natural sources.
like plants,
Plants, yeah.
fungi,
Exactly.
which adds another layer. Right.
It does.
You have to make sure the starting material is good quality
Consistent quality.
before you even get to the chemistry part.
Absolutely.
And I imagine those starting materials can be pretty variable.
Oh, yeah. Plant extracts can vary a lot in terms of their composition and purity.
Wow.
So you often need extra purification steps.
Which could affect whether batch or continuous is better.
It's all connected.
It's like you need to be an expert in botany and extraction on top of the chemistry.
It's a multidisciplinary field for sure.
So we've got these sensitive compounds. They come from these variable natural sources.
Mm-hmm.
What else do we need to worry about?
Another big one is cross-contamination,
Oh, right. We talked about that earlier.
especially in facilities that handle multiple compounds.
Could you break that down for our listener?
Imagine a facility that's producing, say, CBD oil for anxiety.
Okay.
And at the same time, they're making a psychedelic for, I don't know, treatment-resistant depression.
Got it.
Even a tiny bit of that psychedelic ending up in the CBD oil could be bad news.
Yeah, that's a scary thought.
It is.
So how do they make sure that doesn't happen?
Watson dedicates a whole chapter to this in the book.
Really?
Yeah, he calls it contamination control.
Makes sense.
He talks about strict protocols for separating everything,
Okay.
dedicated equipment for each compound,
Right.
rigorous cleaning procedures, even special air filtration systems.
Wow. It sounds intense.
It's all about minimizing that risk.
And what about the equipment itself?
Well, the stuff they use for traditional pharmaceuticals
Huh?
might not always work for these sensitive compounds.
I see.
You often need specialized reactors, containers, even special packaging.
To protect them.
Exactly.
Like how?
Well, think about light sensitivity.
Huh?
You might need amber glass containers.
Oh, right.
Temperature-controlled storage, maybe even nitrogen blanketing to prevent oxidation.
Wow. It's a whole other level of precision compared to making something like aspirin.
It really is.
It sounds like you need a specialized team to handle all of this.
Absolutely. That's where process chemists come in.
They're like the specialists for this kind of work.
They're the experts, yeah.
What makes them so special?
They need to understand not just the chemistry, but also the engineering of scaling up, the regulations,
Wow.
and even the specific quirks of each compound.
They're like the orchestra conductors of pharmaceutical production,
I like that, yeah.
making sure everything's in harmony.
Exactly.
But there's one more big thing we haven't talked about yet.
What's that?
Waste.
Ah, yes, waste management. That's a big one.
It's a big deal. We can't just ignore the environmental impact, especially as these therapies become more mainstream.
Definitely not, and Watson talks about that too.
What does he say?
He points out how much waste the pharmaceutical industry generates.
Right.
Solvents, reagents, packaging, even unused product.
It all adds up.
It does, and those traditional disposal methods, like burning it or putting it in a landfill, they're not good for the environment.
So what's the alternative?
Well, there's a big push towards something called green chemistry,
Okay.
which is all about minimizing waste from the get-go.
I see.
Like using safer solvents, tweaking reaction conditions to reduce byproducts,
Right.
even designing processes where you can recycle the solvents.
So you're building sustainability into the process itself.
Exactly. It's not just an afterthought.
And Watson gives examples of companies doing this.
He does, yeah, in the book. Cool. Like some are using supercritical fluids as solvents,
Right.
like carbon dioxide, which is much more eco-friendly than traditional solvents.
Oh, interesting.
And what about the waste that's already there?
Yeah, what about that?
Well, some companies are looking at bioremediation.
What's that?
It uses microorganisms to break down hazardous waste.
Oh, wow.
Others are using plasma gasification,
Okay.
which uses super high temperatures to turn waste into energy.
So it's about turning trash into treasure.
Exactly.
It's not just about doing the right thing for the planet.
It's also good business.
Right.
Because as environmental regulations get tougher, the costs of those old disposal methods go up.
And consumers are demanding more sustainable products.
Exactly. They want to know their medicines are made responsibly.
So sustainability is essential for any company that wants to stay in the game.
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
And this all applies to cannabinoid and psychedelic APIs as well, right?
Absolutely.
As these therapies become more popular and demand grows, we need to make sure they're produced sustainably.
We can't just scale up without considering the environmental impact.
Right. It's about finding that sweet spot where scientific innovation, economic viability, and environmental responsibility all come together.
Absolutely. And Watson's book gives us a great framework for thinking about all of this.
Yeah, it does.
He shows us how companies are finding creative solutions to these challenges.
Okay, so let's get into some of the specifics of producing these compounds.
Let's dive in.
Let's start with cannabinoids.
Okay.
What are some of the unique challenges there?
Well, remember how we talked about consistency of starting materials?
Yeah.
That's a big one with cannabinoids.
What?
Because unlike a lot of synthetic drugs, they're often extracted from plants.
Right.
And plants can be pretty unpredictable.
In what way?
The chemical composition of a plant can vary a lot,
Okay.
depending on the strain, how it was grown, even when it was harvested.
Oh,
So it's like trying to bake a cake.
yeah.
But the quality of the flour changes every time you open a new bag.
That's a great analogy. That's a challenge for the process chemists.
Oh, for sure. They're trying to develop standardized methods.
Right.
But the starting material keeps shifting on them.
So how do they deal with that?
Well, one approach is to be really picky about the plants.
Okay.
They carefully select and cultivate specific strains that are known to produce high levels of the cannabinoids they want.
So they're controlling the genetics of the plant from the start
Exactly. And they
Wow.
might even work with breeders.
to develop strains that are best for specific medical uses.
It's all about getting that consistent starting material.
And then there's the extraction itself, right?
Right, those traditional methods,
Using solvents.
yeah, like ethanol or butane, they can work, but they often need a lot of purification steps afterwards.
To get rid of the solvents?
Yeah, and any other impurities.
That sounds time-consuming and expensive.
It can be.
So are there alternatives?
That's why people are exploring things like supercritical fluid extraction.
Oh, right. We talked about that.
Using CO2, yeah.
Why is that better?
It's non-toxic, good for the environment, and it doesn't leave any solvent behind in the final product.
Right.
So it ticks a lot of boxes.
Sounds like a win-win.
It does, but it's not without its challenges.
Oh, of course not.
One is that it needs special equipment and know-how.
Okay.
It works at high pressures and temperatures.
Right.
So it can be more complicated and costly to set up.
Got it. So there's always a trade-off.
There always is.
What else?
Well, supercritical CO2 doesn't always get everything out of the plant. You might lose some of those valuable cannabinoids in the process.
Oh, I see.
So researchers are always working on ways to improve it.
To make it more efficient and to get more of what they want.
Exactly.
So you've got the plant material, you've extracted the cannabinoids. What happens next?
Then comes the purification process.
Right.
And that typically involves techniques like chromatography, crystallization, and distillation.
Chromatography, that's one of those molecular detective tools, right? I remember that from our previous deep dives.
It's a powerful way to separate and purify mixtures.
Okay.
And with cannabinoids, it helps isolate the specific ones you want, like CBD or THC, from that initial extract.
Cool. What about crystallization?
Crystallization is like dissolving the cannabinoids in a solvent and then slowly cooling it down.
Okay.
So they form those beautiful, pure crystals.
Like making rock candy,
Exactly.
but with medicine instead of sugar.
It's a great way to get super pure cannabinoids.
And distillation.
Distillation uses the different boiling points of things to separate them.
Okay.
So it can help separate the cannabinoids from other stuff in the extract.
It's a long journey from the plant to that purified API.
It is a multi-step process.
It's impressive how much science and engineering goes into something that seems so simple.
There's a lot happening behind the scenes.
And I bet there's always room for improvement.
Oh, for sure. Researchers are constantly working on making these processes more efficient and sustainable.
It's exciting to think about the possibilities.
It is.
Speaking of possibilities, what about synthetic cannabinoids?
Yeah, that's another whole area of research.
Oh, tell me more.
Instead of extracting from plants, you're creating the cannabinoids in the lab.
Wow, so it's like building them from scratch?
Exactly, using chemical synthesis.
Okay, so what are the advantages of doing it that way?
Well, for one, it gives you a more consistent product.
Right, because plants are unpredictable.
Exactly. With chemical synthesis, you control the exact structure and purity of the molecule.
So no more variations from batch to batch.
You got it.
And it probably saves you the hassle of dealing with all that plant material.
It does. It streamlines the process.
Okay, but the really exciting part is
What's that?
you can create cannabinoids that don't even exist in nature.
Exactly.
Like designer cannabinoids.
In a way, yeah.
So you could potentially design them with very specific properties to treat specific conditions.
That's the ultimate goal.
It's amazing to think about.
It is, and there's already been some progress in that area. Yeah, researchers have created synthetic cannabinoids that are more potent and more targeted.
Meaning?
They work better and have fewer side effects.
Well, so it's not just science fiction anymore.
It's becoming reality.
But I imagine it's not easy to do.
Oh no, chemical synthesis is a tough field, and cannabinoids are complex molecules.
What makes them so challenging?
Well, one thing is they have these things called chiral centers.
Chiral centers.
Yeah, it means there are many possible versions of the molecule.
Oh.
They have the same atoms but arranged differently in space.
Like mirror images of each other.
Yeah, kinda.
And that matters because...
Because those different versions can have completely different effects in the body.
Oh, wow.
Some might be therapeutic, others might be useless or even harmful.
So you have to make sure you create the right version.
Precisely. And that can be really tricky.
I imagine.
It requires a deep understanding of stereochemistry and sophisticated techniques.
Right. And it's probably expensive.
Cost is always a factor.
Right, especially when you're talking about scaling up production.
Exactly. Synthesizing these molecules in the lab can be costly.
Especially if the yield is low.
Yeah, remember, yield is how much product you get from your starting materials.
Right, yeah.
You want a high yield so you're not wasting stuff.
Makes sense.
But with cannabinoids, getting a high yield can be tough.
Why is that?
The synthesis often involves multiple steps.
Okay.
And each step has the potential for losses.
So it's a delicate process.
It is.
And some of the ingredients you need can be expensive or hard to find.
That's true. So it's this constant balancing act.
Right, balancing efficiency, yield, and cost.
That's the name of the game.
It's clear that producing these medicines is complicated.
It's a complex process.
Whether you're extracting them from plants or making them in the lab.
Both approaches have their challenges.
But the potential benefits are huge.
Absolutely.
So it's a challenge worth tackling.
I think so. It's really exciting to see the progress being made.
It really is. It's a testament to the dedication of the people working in this field.
They're pioneers pushing the boundaries of what's possible.
Okay, let's shift gears now and talk about psychedelics.
Sounds good.
What's the landscape like there?
It's just as fascinating and complex as the world of cannabinoids. And as these compounds gain more acceptance, the need for safe and efficient production methods is becoming even more important.
Absolutely. So let's start with the basics. How are psychedelic APIs typically produced?
Well, just like with cannabinoids, there are two main approaches.
Okay.
Extracting them from natural sources or making them in the lab through chemical synthesis.
Okay, let's start with extraction. What are some examples of psychedelics that are typically extracted from natural sources?
Psilocybin, for one,
Okay.
that's found in certain types of mushrooms.
Right.
And DMT, which is present in a variety of plants.
DMT, that's the one that's said to cause those intense, short-lived psychedelic experiences, right?
That's the one. And it can be quite challenging to extract from those natural sources.
Why is that?
Well, first of all, the concentration of these compounds in the plants and fungi is often quite low.
Meaning?
You need to process a ton of raw material just to get a tiny bit of the good stuff.
Oh, wow.
It's like searching for a needle in a haystack.
That sounds difficult.
It can be, and then there's the issue of extracting it without damaging it.
Okay.
Many psychedelics are very sensitive to heat, light, or exposure to air.
So you have to be really careful.
Exactly. You need gentle methods that preserve their integrity.
What are some of those gentle methods?
One that's commonly used is called acid-base extraction.
Okay.
It involves soaking the plant or fungal material in an acidic solution,
Right.
which pulls out the psychedelic compound,
Yeah, okay.
and then they convert it to a salt form for purification.
So it's a delicate dance, manipulating the chemistry to isolate the molecule you want.
Exactly. And then you usually need to purify it further using techniques like chromatography or crystallization.
We talked about those earlier.
We did. The principles are the same.
Yeah.
But the specifics can vary depending on the compound.
Makes sense.
It's all about tailoring your techniques to the individual psychedelic you're working with.
And I imagine safety is a big concern here.
Oh, absolutely. Paramount.
Because we're dealing with substances that can have profound effects.
Exactly. So it's crucial to handle them with extreme care,
Right.
following all the proper safety protocols.
Like wearing protective gear,
Yes,
working in a well-ventilated area,
absolutely.
having strict procedures for storage and disposal,
All of that.
so you're not accidentally tripping out in the lab.
Not ideal.
And you need to make sure the final product is clean.
Free of any contaminants or residual solvents, yeah.
Right.
That could be dangerous.
So that's extraction from natural sources.
Right.
What about chemical synthesis?
Well, that's becoming increasingly important.
Especially as the demand for these psychedelics grows.
Yes, and as research explores new applications.
So what are the benefits of making them in the lab instead of extracting them from plants or fungi?
Well, for one, it gives you much more control over consistency and reliability.
Because those natural sources can vary a lot
Exactly.
in their potency and composition.
Exactly. But with chemical synthesis, you're building the molecule from the ground up.
You're not relying on nature to do the work for you.
Right. You can control the exact structure and purity.
Ensuring a consistent product every time.
Precisely.
And it probably eliminates the need to source and process huge amounts of plants and fungi.
It does, which saves time and resources.
And just like with cannabinoids, the exciting part is the potential to create new molecules.
Ones that don't exist in nature.
Designer psychedelics.
In a way, yes. It's the potential to create molecules with specific properties tailored to treat certain conditions.
That's mind-blowing. But I'm sure synthesizing these complex molecules comes with its own set of challenges.
Of course, it's a very demanding field.
What are some of the hurdles?
Well, many psychedelics have these fragile parts.
Fragile parts.
Yeah, we call them functional groups.
Okay.
They can easily break down during the synthesis process, so you have to be very careful.
Right.
Plan everything out, optimize the conditions.
To protect those delicate parts of the molecule.
Exactly. Otherwise, your yield will suffer.
So it's like a delicate dance, balancing all these factors.
Yes.
And some of the chemicals you need can be hazardous.
Yes, some require special safety precautions.
Right. You don't want any accidents in the lab.
Definitely not. Safety is paramount.
So whether we're talking about extracting them from natural sources or making them in the lab,
Right.
producing psychedelics is a highly specialized field.
It requires a lot of expertise and attention to detail.
It's amazing to see the science behind it all.
It is, and it's only going to become more important as these therapies become more mainstream.
Speaking of mainstream, one of the big things that comes up in pharmaceutical process development is scalability.
Yes, it's one thing to make a small amount in a lab,
Right.
but scaling up to meet the needs of clinical trials or commercial production is a whole other challenge.
So what are some of the key things to consider when scaling up psychedelic production?
Well, a lot of the principles we discussed for cannabinoids apply here as well.
Like what?
You need to carefully choose and optimize your production methods
Okay.
and ensure you have robust quality control measures at every step.
Consistency and purity are essential.
Absolutely, especially when we're talking about medicines for people.
Right.
And you also need to consider things like cost effectiveness, environmental impact, and regulatory compliance.
So it's a multifaceted challenge.
It is. You need to approach it holistically.
And I imagine one of the challenges is access to starting materials.
That's a big one, especially as you scale up.
How so?
Well, if you're extracting from natural sources, you need a reliable supply of the plant or fungal material.
Makes sense.
And for those made synthetically, you need a steady supply of the right chemicals and precursors.
So it's all about managing your supply chain.
Exactly.
And I imagine regulations can make that tricky,
They definitely can.
especially for psychedelics, which are often still classified as Schedule I substances,
Right. Those classifications create all sorts of hurdles,
making it difficult and expensive to work with these compounds.
especially for research and development.
So navigating the regulatory landscape is one of the biggest hurdles,
It's a significant challenge.
but one worth overcoming.
Absolutely. The potential benefits are too great to ignore.
And as research progresses, hopefully those regulations will become more accommodating.
I'm optimistic about that.
So we've talked about scaling up production volume, but it's not just about quantity.
Right. Quality is just as important, if not more so.
So how do companies ensure that the quality of the psychedelic API stays high as they increase production?
It all comes down to having strong quality control measures in place.
Right.
This might involve rigorous testing at multiple stages.
From the raw materials to the final product.
Exactly. Constantly monitoring and verifying purity, potency, and stability.
Making sure everything meets the specifications.
Precisely. And that requires investing in sophisticated equipment
Right.
and training skilled personnel.
It's like having a team of quality detectives constantly on the lookout for any problems,
That's a great way to put it.
making sure these therapies are safe and effective.
That's the ultimate goal.
And speaking of safety and efficacy, we've been talking a lot about the technical aspects of production. But before we go any further, I want to emphasize something.
What's up?
The importance of quality control in every step of this process.
You're absolutely right.
We've talked about scaling up, different extraction and synthesis techniques, the art of formulation.
Right.
But none of that matters if the quality isn't there.
Exactly. Quality control is the foundation.
It's not enough to just create these compounds. We have to make sure they're produced to the highest standards.
Absolutely.
Standards of purity, potency, and stability.
Precisely. And that requires a comprehensive quality management system
Yep.
that covers every stage of the process,
From sourcing the raw materials to releasing the final product.
every step of the way.
So it's like having a team of expert inspectors,
Yes.
scrutinizing every detail,
Making sure everything is up to par.
from the cleanliness of the facilities
Yeah.
to the calibration of the equipment to the accuracy of the testing.
You got it. It's about going above and beyond just meeting the minimum requirements.
It's about ensuring that patients are getting the highest quality medicines possible.
Absolutely. That's what it all comes down to in the end.
And that involves things like good manufacturing practices, right?
They are. GMP is essential.
Right, GMP guidelines.
It's a whole framework for ensuring quality and consistency,
Yeah.
covering everything from facility design to personnel training to documentation.
Wow, it sounds really thorough.
It is very comprehensive.
So how do those GMP principles apply to making cannabinoids and psychedelics, especially at a commercial scale?
Well, one example is the strict control over raw materials.
Right, we talked about how the quality of plant-derived materials can be all over the place.
Exactly. So you need robust procedures to verify their identity, purity, and potency before they're even allowed into production.
It's like having a botanical expert on staff,
Yeah, someone who knows their plants inside and out.
making sure they're getting the right stuff.
Absolutely. And for synthetic compounds, GMP requires meticulous documentation,
Yep.
tracing all the reagents and precursors used in the synthesis.
To make sure they meet the purity standards.
Right, and to make sure nothing's been tampered with or contaminated.
So there's a lot of paperwork involved.
There is, but it's necessary for accountability.
Right, so you can trace everything back to its source.
Exactly. And another key aspect of GMP is the control over the production processes.
Okay.
Having clear procedures for every single step.
From weighing the ingredients to packaging the final product.
All of it.
So it's like a detailed recipe.
Yeah, a recipe that everyone in the facility has to follow precisely.
And those procedures have to be validated.
Right, you have to prove that they consistently produce a product that meets the specs.
So it's not just about writing it down. You have to test it out and make sure it works.
Exactly. It's all about ensuring quality and reliability.
It's clear that GMP compliance is a big deal,
It is. It takes a lot of effort.
but it's essential for patient safety.
Absolutely. That's the top priority.
And speaking of the people involved, it's easy to get lost in all the technical details.
Yeah.
But there's a human element to all of this.
There is, and it's important to acknowledge that.
Absolutely. Behind all the science, technology, and regulations, there are real people who are passionate about this work.
People who are driven to bring these therapies to the world.
Right. It's the researchers, the chemists, the engineers, the quality control specialists.
All of them.
They're the ones who make all of this possible.
They're the unsung heroes.
It's inspiring to think about the dedication and expertise that goes into bringing these medicines to patients.
It's a collective effort, for sure.
And it's not always an easy journey.
No, it's often filled with challenges and setbacks.
Watson talks about that in his book, right?
He does. He mentions unexpected roadblocks.
Like finding a new impurity late in the game.
Yeah, or running into scaling issues that require major redesigns.
It's a reminder that science is rarely a straight line.
It's more like a winding path with unexpected turns.
And it takes a lot of grit to keep going when things get tough.
Perseverance is key.
So it's not just about scientific knowledge, it's also about problem solving.
Absolutely. You have to be creative and innovative.
What are some examples of those creative solutions that Watson talks about?
Well, one example is using continuous crystallization to purify a particularly challenging API.
Here's the challenge.
The traditional batch methods weren't cutting it.
Oh, I see.
They weren't getting the purity levels they needed.
So they had to come up with something new.
Right. They developed a continuous process.
And that solved the problem.
It did. They were able to carefully control the temperature, flow rate, and solvent composition.
So they essentially redesigned the whole crystallization process.
Exactly. They had to think outside the box.
That's impressive.
Another example is using enzymatic reactions
Okay.
to create a key ingredient in a psychedelic synthesis.
Enzymes, those are biological catalysts, right?
That's right, they can be very efficient and selective.
What's the advantage of using them?
They allow for milder reaction conditions
Ah.
and reduce the need for harsh chemicals.
So it's a more environmentally friendly approach.
Exactly. It's about harnessing the power of nature to improve the process.
Those are just a couple of examples.
Right, there are many more.
It shows how dynamic this field is.
It's constantly evolving, always pushing the boundaries.
And the production of cannabinoids and psychedelics is definitely pushing those boundaries.
Oh, absolutely. These compounds present unique challenges and opportunities.
Before we move on, I want to touch on something important.
Okay.
The ethical implications of bringing these therapies into the mainstream.
That's a crucial consideration.
As we explore the therapeutic potential of these compounds,
Yeah.
we need to think about the ethical implications.
And ensure they're used responsibly.
For example, how do we make sure these therapies are accessible to everyone who needs them?
That's a key question.
Not just those who can afford it.
Right, we need to address potential disparity.
And work towards a system that's fair and equitable.
Absolutely.
And how do we prevent misuse or abuse?
That's another important point.
Especially given the history of stigma and prohibition surrounding these substances.
Education and responsible regulation will be crucial.
Right. We need to move away from fear-based policies.
And embrace a more nuanced understanding of these compounds.
Understanding both their benefits and their risks.
Exactly.
And it's not just a conversation for scientists and doctors.
Right.
We need to involve patients, policymakers, community leaders.
Everyone has a stake in this.
It's about creating a dialogue, building understanding, and working together.
To ensure these therapies are developed and used ethically.
Well said. It's an exciting and challenging time for this field.
It is. We're at a crossroads.
As we navigate this new territory. Let's keep in mind what Watson says in his book.
What's that?
The ultimate goal of our work is to improve human health and well-being.
I like that.
Let's keep that goal at the forefront
Absolutely.
as we continue to explore the incredible potential of these therapies.
I agree. It's all about improving lives.
Okay, so let's talk about some of the specific challenges of scaling up,
Sounds
moving from pilot scale to commercial production.
That's where things can get really tricky.
So let's say we have a promising psychedelic compound.
Okay.
Let's call it Mind Bloom.
I like it.
It's shown great results in early trials.
That's great.
We've made it successfully at pilot scale.
Okay.
But now we need to figure out how to make a lot more of it.
To meet the potential demand.
Exactly. What are some of the hurdles we might face?
One of the biggest is making sure the process stays consistent.
As you increase the batch size.
Exactly. What works perfectly in a small reactor might behave completely differently in a much larger one.
So it's not just about multiplying the recipe.
No, it's much more complex than that.
What changes?
Things like mixing, heat transfer, reaction kinetics,
Okay.
they can all change as you scale up.
And that can affect the quality of the final product.
Absolutely. The yield, the purity, even the stability.
So it's like trying to conduct a giant orchestra.
Yeah.
Where the number of musicians suddenly increases tenfold. You have to make sure everyone's still in sync.
Great analogy.
And the music still sounds good.
Exactly. And Watson talks about the importance of identifying and controlling critical process parameters.
Okay, critical process parameters.
These are the variables that have the biggest impact on quality.
And you need to keep a close eye on them as you scale up.
Absolutely. Monitor them carefully and adjust as needed.
So it's about finding that sweet spot for each parameter.
Exactly, to get the best results.
But how do you do that?
Well, often you need to use sophisticated technology.
Like what?
Things like inline sensors that measure temperature, pH, concentration.
Right inside the reactor.
Exactly, real-time monitoring.
And that helps you control the process more precisely.
It does. It reduces the risk of deviations and helps ensure consistent quality.
So you're basically getting instant feedback.
Yeah, like having a team of tiny detectives inside the reactor.
Keeping an eye on everything.
Exactly.
And that's especially important when you're working with potent compounds like psychedelics.
Oh, absolutely, where even small variations can have big effects.
Okay, so we've got these process challenges.
Right.
What else do we need to think about when scaling up?
Raw materials are a big one.
Okay.
As you ramp up production, you need to make sure you have enough of everything, the ingredients, the precursors.
A steady supply.
Exactly, otherwise you'll grind to a halt.
So it's all about managing your supply chain.
It is, and that can be tricky for psychedelics.
Because of the regulations.
Yeah, many of them are still derived from natural sources.
Yeah.
Or require specialized precursors that might be hard to come by.
So you need to think strategically about sourcing.
Absolutely. Identify potential bottlenecks and plan ahead.
And we can't forget about the environment,
Right. Sustainability is crucial.
especially as we increase production.
We need to minimize our impact.
Using green chemistry principles, reducing waste, finding eco-friendly alternative.
Exactly. It's about balancing growth with responsibility.
And speaking of responsibility, I imagine the regulatory hurdles get even higher as you move towards commercial production.
Oh, definitely. The stakes are much higher.
So you need to make sure everything is compliant,
Facilities, processes, products,
meeting all the requirements.
permits, licenses, validation studies, quality management systems.
It sounds like a huge undertaking,
It is a major investment.
but it's necessary to ensure patient safety.
Absolutely. That's the ultimate goal.
Okay, let's dive into a specific challenge that could be particularly tough during scale-up.
Okay.
Impurity control.
Yes. Impurities. The bane of a chemist's existence,
They can really throw a wrench in the works.
especially at large scale.
So tell me, what kinds of impurities are we talking about?
They can come from different places. They might already be in the starting materials,
Right.
or they can form during the reactions.
And they can have different effects.
Some might be harmless.
Okay.
Others could be toxic or change how the medicine works.
So you have to get rid of them.
Exactly. But first, you need to know what you're dealing with.
Identify them.
Right. Figure out what they are and how much is there.
How do you do that?
Using analytical techniques like chromatography and spectroscopy,
Okay.
once you know what you're up against, you can develop a strategy.
To remove them or prevent them from forming.
Exactly.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
It is.
Preventing and cleaning up.
That's a good way to put it.
What are some of the methods you use?
You might tweak the reaction conditions,
Okay.
change the order of steps, add purification steps.
So it's a lot of fine-tuning
It is. It's all about finding the right balance.
to optimize the reaction and control those impurities.
And it's even more important as you scale up.
Right, because the consequences are greater.
Absolutely. You're making more of the product.
So any impurities would be amplified.
Exactly. So you have to be extra careful.
It's all about ensuring the purity and safety of the final product.
That's the bottom line.
And that brings us to another important aspect of scaling up.
What's that?
Process optimization.
Ah, yes. That's where the magic happens.
It's about taking a process that works in the lab
Mm-hmm.
and making it work efficiently on a much larger scale.
Exactly. Turning it into a robust manufacturing process.
So it's like taking a rough draft and polishing it into a masterpiece,
That's a great way to put it.
making sure everything is working perfectly.
And it all starts with understanding the reaction mechanism.
The reaction mechanism.
Yeah, it's like the detailed instructions for how the reaction happens.
At the molecular level.
Exactly. You need to know what's going on at the tiniest level.
So you can figure out how to control it.
Right. By understanding the intermediates, the transition states, the factors that affect the rate of reaction.
You can start tweaking the conditions.
Exactly. See how they impact the yield, the purity, all the key parameters.
So you're conducting experiments
We are. It's all about data collection and analysis.
to figure out the optimal temperature, pressure, catalyst concentration, all of that,
Exactly. And we use statistical methods to guide our experimentation.
like design of experiments.
That's right. DOE helps us test multiple variables at once
Okay.
and find the best conditions for the process.
So you're not just randomly changing things?
No, it's a systematic approach.
And as you collect data, you can build models
Mathematical models, yeah.
that predict how the process will behave.
Exactly. So you can anticipate challenges and make informed decisions.
So you're essentially creating a virtual version of the process
In a way, yes.
that you can use to test out different scenarios.
It's a powerful tool for optimization.
It's amazing how technology is transforming manufacturing.
It is. It's allowing us to do things that were unimaginable just a few years ago,
And it's essential for meeting the growing demand for these therapies.
while maintaining the highest standards.
Exactly. It's a win-win.
It is.
Okay, before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to bring it back to the human element again.
I like that.
It's easy to get caught up in the technical side,
It is.
but we can't forget about the people who are making this happen.
The scientists, the engineers, the quality control specialists,
All of them.
it's their passion and dedication that drives this field forward.
They believe in the potential of these therapies.
And they're working tirelessly to make them a reality.
It's inspiring to think about the countless hours they put in.
It is. They're true pioneers.
So let's talk about the potential impact of all of this.
The societal impact.
Yeah. How could these therapies change the world?
Well, for starters, they could completely transform mental health care.
Okay.
We've talked about their potential for treating depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction.
Right.
These are conditions that affect millions of people. and current treatments often fall short.
They're not always effective, and they can have side effects.
Exactly. So if cannabinoids and psychedelics prove to be safe and effective, they could offer a much-needed alternative.
It's not just about adding new tools.
Right.
It's about potentially changing the entire paradigm.
Shifting the way we think about and approach mental health.
And that could have ripple effects throughout society.
Absolutely.
Imagine a world where people have better tools to manage their mental and emotional well-being.
That's a powerful thought.
It could lead to less crime, less violence, less substance abuse.
And more creativity, empathy, compassion.
It's a hopeful vision.
It is.
And what about their potential impact on spirituality and consciousness?
That's another fascinating area.
There's growing evidence that psychedelics can facilitate spiritual experiences.
Enhance self-awareness, promote feelings of interconnectedness.
It's like opening up new dimensions of human experience.
It is, but we need to approach these possibilities with caution.
Right. It's important to proceed responsibly.
With careful research, regulation, and education.
And to be mindful of the potential risks.
Absolutely. There's still much we don't know.
It's a journey of discovery.
And we need to be both curious and humble.
Always prioritizing the well-being of individuals and communities.
That's the guiding principle.
Okay, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
I'm feeling a sense of awe at the complexity and potential of this field.
Me too. It's a truly remarkable area of research.
It's a fascinating intersection of science, medicine, ethics, and spirituality.
All coming together.
And it's clear that we're just at the beginning.
Absolutely. There's so much more to explore.
I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Me too. It's a time of great change and innovation.
Okay, before we sign off,
Yes.
I want to leave our listeners with a question.
Okay, I like it.
As we continue to unlock the secrets of these compounds and explore their therapeutic potential,
Yes.
what role do you see yourself playing in this evolving landscape?
That's a great question. It challenges us to think about how we can each contribute,
To the responsible development and integration of these therapies?
whether it's through supporting research, advocating for policy changes, educating ourselves and others.
Or simply engaging in open and honest conversations?
We all have a role to play.
It's a collective effort.
It is.
And that's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
Thank you for joining us on this fascinating journey.
It's been my pleasure.
And until next time, keep diving deep into the world of science and medicine.
Keep exploring, keep learning. Absolutely. It's a collective effort for sure. And speaking of collective efforts, let's shift our focus to a topic that's gaining increasing attention in the pharmaceutical industry, the concept of quality by design, or QBD.
QBD, I like the sound of that.
Yeah.
What is it exactly?
Well, it's a philosophy, really, that emphasizes building quality into a product and its manufacturing process right from the start, rather than just relying on testing the final product.
So it's a more proactive approach to quality.
Exactly. Instead of just checking at the end, you're thinking about quality throughout the entire process.
And trying to prevent problems before they even happen.
Exactly. It's all about understanding the factors that can influence quality and designing the process to minimize risk.
It sounds like a much more holistic and comprehensive way to manage quality.
It is, and it's becoming increasingly important in the pharmaceutical world, especially as regulators focus more on process understanding and risk management.
So how does QBD work in the real world?
It starts with identifying those critical quality attributes, or CQAs, of the product.
CQAs, what are those?
Those are the characteristics that are absolutely essential for the product's safety and effectiveness.
So for a psychedelic API, that might be its purity or the specific ratio of isomers.
Exactly. You have to define those non-negotiables, the things that absolutely have to be met.
Makes sense. So you figure out those CQAs, then what?
Then you need to understand everything that can affect those attributes throughout the production process.
Like what kinds of things?
The quality of your starting materials, the conditions of your reactions, the equipment you're using, even the training of your personnel.
It's like mapping out all the potential risks to quality.
That's a great way to put it. Once you have that map, you can design your process to avoid those risks.
So you might implement stricter controls, choose better equipment, or validate your processes more thoroughly.
Exactly. It's all about anticipating potential problems and building solutions into the process from day one.
And QBD also emphasizes continuous improvement, right?
It does. It's about always looking for ways to do things better, monitoring the process, gathering data, and making adjustments.
To constantly improve quality and efficiency.
Precisely. It's a powerful framework for making sure these therapies are consistently produced to the highest standards.
Especially as they move from those early clinical trials to large-scale production.
Exactly. And it's particularly relevant for cannabinoids and psychedelics, given all the unique challenges they face.
Okay, before we wrap things up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier.
Sure.
This idea of these therapies revolutionizing mental health care.
It's an exciting prospect, but it also raises some important questions about how we integrate them into our current healthcare system.
Right, like how do we train healthcare providers to administer these therapies safely and effectively?
That's a key challenge. Many of these compounds have unique properties.
They're not your typical pharmaceutical.
Exactly. So we'll need specialized training programs for therapists, doctors, nurses, anyone involved in administering these treatments.
Covering things like dosage, set and setting, integrating the experiences, potential risks, and contraindications.
That a whole new skill set.
And it's not just about individual practitioners.
Right.
We need to create whole systems of care that support the use of these therapies.
Absolutely. We need ethical guidelines, best practices, support networks for both patients and practitioners.
And we need to make sure these therapies are accessible to everyone who needs them.
Absolutely. Equitable access is crucial, regardless of financial resources, location, or background.
We can't let these therapies become just another luxury for the privileged few.
Exactly. They have the potential to benefit everyone.
And of course, we need ongoing research.
Always. There's still so much we don't know.
To fully understand the mechanisms, the long-term effects, the potential applications.
The research is incredibly promising, but it needs to continue.
It's paving the way for a new era in mental health care.
It is. It's a paradigm shift.
Well, as we come to the end of our deep dive today, I'm filled with a sense of awe and optimism.
Me too. The potential of these therapies is immense.
To alleviate suffering, to expand consciousness, to improve well-being.
There are challenges, but I'm confident we can overcome them.
By working together with wisdom, compassion, and a commitment to science and ethics.
Absolutely. Those are the guiding principles.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our exploration of process chemistry and the production of cannabinoid and psychedelic APIs.
Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you all. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those thought-provoking questions.